Hi everyone and welcome to another FSElite video, and we are back with another X-Plane 12 deep dive, and today we are going to be focusing on this brand new world that Austin and the X-Plane team have been creating. So I am joined by Austin, the man behind X-Plane. So hi Austin, how are you doing?
Doing well. Sitting here doing some next generation aerodynamics for X-Plane 12 now, which we can go into if you want, but doing great.
Excellent. Yes, we will talk all about all of that stuff in just a second. So for anyone who is watching these videos and aren't too sorry, did I get some feedback? Just changing. Um, so for anyone who hasn't seen these videos yet, these are our deep dive videos with, I think I'm getting feedback on someone.
Test, test, test. I mean, to me, the audio is absolutely great. My video looks great. My audio sounds great. I'm getting no feedback at all. To me, it's awesome. I can put on a pair of headsets if you want. If you think your feedback is coming back from me, you want me to put on a pair of headsets and see what happens?
Let me just do 1 2 1 2 1 2. Oh, that's weird. It's fine now.
Okay.
Yeah, it should be good. All right, good. So yeah, for anyone who hasn't seen these videos yet, these are our deep dive exploration videos, and we're going to be looking at lots of different aspects of X-Plane 12 due to the fact that there is so much to talk about. So in this video, we are going to talk a little bit more about the world, and Austin's going to talk a little bit about the flight dynamics, how this world is all connected, and we're going to learn a little bit of history on how X-Plane 12 came to be. So Austin, my first question is something completely not in X-Plane, and just to learn a little bit more about yourself, what do you do outside of X-Plane as hobbies, and what else do you get up to in your spare time?
Right. Okay. So X-Plane is just the vast majority of my time. I mean, it's both my hobby and my job. And when I'm not coding X-Plane, a lot of the time I'm just flying it for fun. And what I do is I like build these insane airplanes with just super high wing loading, where you like have to fly the approach at 400 knots just to stay in the air, doing things like hypersonic flights from California to New York, where the whole name of the game is how well can you plan your deceleration and your descent and your descent from orbit, losing energy to land in New York. So I'm always using X-Plane to fly the crazy cases and to test fly the aircraft that come with X-Plane. And so we roll in new airplanes, with each version of X-Plane. And I mean, partially, I choose the airplanes that I want to be flying in my spare time. And we can talk about the airplane choices that have been made for X-Plane 12. There's a reason for every one of them. So, and of course, I'm always flying my Lancer Evolution. I fly around all over the country on business to serve customers and to work with Beta, which is a company I'm working with in Burlington, Vermont, that builds an electric vertical takeoff and landing airplane. And so, yeah, I do a lot of flying as well in my spare time.
Awesome. So I think it's great that you're able to do involved in the sim as well as building it and stuff, and obviously using that experience to help with the foundations of X-Plane. And something that has always been with me is the fact you built X-Plane to help further your own flying experience way back in the day. Is that right?
Yeah, so back when I first started X-Plane, I was writing it to use for instrument training in a Piper Archer. I was having a problem passing an instrument currency check in a Piper Archer. This is back when I only had probably 200 hours or something like that. And so, yeah, I built it as an instrument flight training sim. But I quickly found that the laws that apply to the Piper Archer could be made very generalized if you break the plane down into a bunch of little pieces or elements and find the forces on each element of the wing and the tail and the prop. And I could apply it to any airplane. And so now, of course, X-Plane has moved way, way, way past simple instrument training. And I mean, we're doing seaplanes, helicopters, autogyros, jets, props, experimental craft that don't exist yet. Yesterday, I was working on making this SpaceX Starship rocket stand vertically on the runway for Starship flight. So we've gone way past instrument training. It feels like training wheels now, the idea of just using X-Plane for instrument training. And over the last, say, 30 days or so, we've been doing private alpha testing of X-Plane 12. And we've got we got about 200 people in the private alpha program, I guess, and about another 15 or so on my private little invite-only party list. that are testing direct alphas I'm sending out to customers every day. I'm like doing
Wow.
daily updates to my private customers. And I got guys that are professional seaplane pilots, bringing in some glider pilots now, professional and military helicopter pilots. And so we're really dialing in all of these aerodynamics for just the absolute the edge of the flight envelope for blade element theory.
Amazing. So we'll talk a little bit more about planes in just a moment, but I want to do a little bit more exploration as to how X-Plane 12 came to be. So I think one of the things that was really noticeable about X-Plane 11 was how many kind of updates and releases you did. I mean, we're at X-Plane 11.55 now, and each kind of incremental thing brought something new and exciting with it. At what point did you go, right, this is now X-Plane 12, and what was the catalyst behind that, and what was that big feature you thought you needed to change the number at the beginning of it?
You have no idea how much internal argument there was over that. I mean, I almost, not quite, but almost got into shouting matches with Ben Supnick, who is kind of my right-hand man here at Laminar and manages the releases, because Ben made that decision before I did. It was about 2 or 3 years ago that Ben was like, that's it, we're done. We're not putting anything into X-Plane 11. We need to focus on X-Plane 12 now. And I was like, every time I get a new aerodynamics thing, a new way to improve the flight model, I'm like, oh, just do a point release with this flight model update. It's not that bad. It's one more flight. It can't hurt. And because when I see a flight model update, I see something that's not as good as it could be for the product in the field, and I don't want to mislead anybody. You see, I don't want somebody flying an old flight model getting misleading data about what an airplane does, and in theory, maybe crashing a real airplane, then saying, well, you told me the airplane would do this and it didn't, So, I mean, I almost look at this as like a liability question. It's either right or I'm screwing up my job. And so I'm always trying to jam more flight model updates in there. And Ben is trying to hold back and make the business case for saying, well, hold the phone. You can't just give free updates forever. We'll put ourselves out of business. So Ben was looking at the business case. I was, for bringing in revenue. I was looking at the liability case for not messing up the sim. And as you see, those are both pretty strong cases we're making. Nobody here is being trivial or frivolous about our decisions. So there was a lot of argument, but eventually it came down to Ben saying, well, I'm not doing any more X-Plane 11 releases, and Ben manages the release. And so, at that point we started working on X-Plane 12. Now, since I've got my little private alpha list of people that I can send betas to directly, or alphas, I should say, to directly, I've been doing an update literally every day for the last month. And I freaking love it. I've loved it because I can send something out and the seaplane guy can go, well, yeah, the seaplanes feel about right. But in the real world, I shut down the engine. I coast about 4 airplane lengths before I run out of speed. And I'm like, oh, let me tweak the water, friction drag on the floats. And so I'm moving at the speed that I like to move right now during the alpha program. And what this is making clear to me, how much I love doing this and how much better the flight model is getting because of it, because I have experts, SMEs, subject matter experts in each bit of aviation. I'm going to be running a lot more private alpha programs in the future where people will, maybe 50 people or 100 people, something like that. Seems like a decent number, maybe 50. We'll be able to get private alphas from me and completely bypass the normal Laminar Research quality assurance checks. Right? We're not going to run these checks on, does the scenery load right? Is the fog and lighting right? We're going to bypass all those checks that slow us down. And I'm going to say, here's the new flight model stuff. Try it. Does this dial in the way the airplane really flies? And I'm going to be able to run that constantly in the background. So there's going to be this kind of secret high-speed test loop with subject matter experts getting alphas directly from me. And soon they'll be called betas instead of alphas. But betas directly from me. And then beyond that, there's a lower frequency public beta. And then, of course, the lower frequency public release that runs up above that. So bottom line is Ben and I each had reasons for making the decision that we wanted to make. But ultimately, it feels like 3 years ago or something, we cut off version 11 and said we're focusing on 12. And while we're talking about cutting off version 11 to go to version 12, we're posting some version 12 images on YouTube and, little videos and stuff on YouTube. And I'm looking at the comments, and the comments are probably 90% people saying, oh, it's great. I love it. It looks so awesome. But there's about 10%, maybe 15, maybe even 20% of the comments saying, oh, this just looks like, 11.6 to me. It doesn't really look like that much different. It looks about the same as 11. And I totally get that. I get that. I get that comment. I don't even object to the comment. But here's the fascinating thing. We have rewritten, for X-Plane 12, we've rewritten or overhauled basically everything. I mean, flight model, weather, trees, and what people see as I see, oh, the trees are completely new and different. Oh, the lighting is completely new and different. Oh, the clouds are completely new and different. Oh, the rain effects on the windshield are completely new and different. But those are just Christmas tree lights. The fundamental Christmas tree is unchanged. Well, what they don't see is the flight model has been just refined and improved flight model wide. And so the whole Christmas tree has been rebuilt from the inside out. And that's not visible in the videos. That's something you're going to feel when you go flying. And a lot of folks are saying, well, the what we call the DSF files, so the scenery looks about the same. And yeah, I have to admit, they're right. And so we're working on that internally. We're working to overhaul the scenery files as well to make them better. And those just haven't made their appearance in the video yet. But my hope is we still have a ways to go. And in fact, we do have a ways to go yet. And I know that we're going to have some huge improvements in the coastline, because I've seen the screenshots coming out of some of our artists in Eastern Europe, where they're actually getting the terrain to be like this, and then the terrain to be like this, and then the water to everything's backwards in my camera. I'm looking at myself. The terrain is sloped down, and then the water intercepts the terrain at the coast, and then you can start to see the terrain fade out below the water at the beaches. You see, so that's a thing we're going to be releasing soon, and that's going to be a big step in the scenery when it's no longer just scenery now painted water. No, it's a physical water sitting on top of the sand. And so that's going to take our beaches up to a really nice level. And the next thing I really want to improve is the roads. I think the roads just look like polygonal, tinker toys or something. So roads is a really serious one I want to get. But here's what's interesting about that. If we get the roads as curvy as I want them to be, which we can do, by the way, then the memory goes up, the load time goes up, the possibility of a crash goes up, and then you have a sim that takes forever to load and might crash. And that's not what I want to deliver. Other sims have delivered that. Maybe that's not what I want to deliver. And so, the question is, how much do we dial back the polygon count to make sure we can still do with the sim what I want to do with the sim, which is quickly load, not crash, have a high frame rate, and a really accurate flight model, because that's the absolute key. And then having nice looking, smooth, curvy roads. Well, that's a nice to have, but a high frame rate, a quick load, and a safe, reliable run to show an excellent flight model, that's non-negotiable. That's what you have to start with.
So you're obviously very passionate about the flight model. Just before this interview, you were talking about, are we going to be on camera? Because I can be doing some coding here for one of the flight models you're working on.
Yeah.
So I think one of the primary reasons people use X-Plane is for its high fidelity flight modeling that you've done. Mm-hmm. So could you talk us a little bit? I'm imagining the changes are unfathomable in terms of how much has changed between the last release of X-Plane 11 and where we are today. But if you were able to give us a high level overview of what those changes are, that would be great.
There's so many little details. We would be here forever with me looking through notes. Why don't I just tell you what I was working on at the moment the Zoom call came in, and I had to put down my code to focus on the Zoom call. So I'll just give you one off the top of my head I'm working on right now. So everybody tells you that an airfoil, let's get a piece of scratch paper here. Everyone tells you that an airfoil will start off at low lift, go up to a high, angle of attack. It starts off at a low lift. As you get a higher angle of attack, the lift comes up, and at some point you get your stalling angle of attack and the lift plummets. This is what an airfoil does. Well, this is what everybody tells you an airfoil does. This is what everybody tells you a wing does. And of course they're right, but of course they're only right for one case. That is the so-called infinite aspect ratio wing, a wing that's infinitely long and thin. But as you get to a wing that has a finite aspect ratio, aka a wingtip, a wingtip, it doesn't go out forever. It has a wingtip. Air starts rolling over the wing tip, and that dynamic starts to change. Because as that wing goes to a higher angle of attack, rather than just having a stall from the air going over the top of the wing, the air starts to cheat and wrap around the tip. And that changes that stall, doesn't it? It changes how much lift you can get. And then you go to what's called a delta wing. And a delta wing is a shape kind of like this, right? If it's this is a delta wing. And then what happens is, rather than stalling, the air goes to this vortex over the top. and you're getting vortex lift. And what's interesting about that is all of a sudden, what drives the dynamics is the plan form of the wing. What you see, whether you have that delta wing shape, not the
Mm.
airfoil cross section. You see, we're all taught to believe that what matters is the airfoil cross section. What actually matters in some cases is the airfoil shape from the top down. Because this delta wing here, it cares very little what the supposed lift is with angle of attack. This cares about whether a vortex comes over that leading edge and keeps vortex lift. Now, why do I care about this? Why am I suddenly obsessing over whether a wing gets its lift from the airfoil cross section or the wing top view, which are two different things? And the answer is we're looking at the horizontal stabilizer of an F-14 right now. And if that horizontal stabilizer of an F-14 doesn't do what it's supposed to do or stalls, you're going to lose control of the airplane. And an F-14 is one of the new airplanes for X-Plane 12. I wanted to fly right. And so right now what I'm doing is getting this vortex lift dialed in for horizontal stabilizers so the F-14 flies right and flies right for the right reasons with no fakery. So what we had historically done for the last few months or so, we've been working on the F-14, is we simply kind of faked this two-dimensional chart to try and match what would happen with the vortex lift. Well, that's wrong. That's the wrong way to do it. The right way to do it is have the proper lift versus angle of attack for a flat plate, which is a crappy lift versus angle of attack, because flat plates don't have a nice little shape to get lift at all. But then look at the plan form from the top down and see how the vortex forms to actually get the right lift. And when we do that, an F-14 will fly right, and it'll fly right for the right reasons. So that was just a thing I put down just to take this interview. And it's been something like that every day for 3 years now. For 3 years, I've been doing the flight models. It's something like that every day for 3 years,
I
which
think
makes
the
it
last,
1,000 things like this.
yeah, I think the last time we spoke, in fact, I think you put down you were coding the clouds or something, or you had just started the work on the clouds, and
Mm-hmm.
this was like 3 or 4 days before Expo or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously things work really, really fast for you, which, based on what you were saying earlier, you quite enjoy that fast paced
Oh, yeah.
um,
Well, I don't
work and
like
stuff.
those late Here's what I don't like. I don't like doing a lot of work on the sim and then having nobody realize the benefit. That's what
Mm.
I don't like. I mean, why sit here and do the work if I'm the only one that's going to enjoy the benefit? I mean, there's very little, there's certainly no financial upside to that, and there's little societal upside to that. If I'm to do the work, it needs to, don't hide your light under a bushel, right? If I'm to do the work, I got to get it out there.
Yeah. And have you had much? You talked about these SMEs earlier. Have they had much input onto what you're currently doing, or is this the work before you send them the update to get that feedback?
Well, so first I try to follow the laws of physics, and there's just plenty of Googling, internet research on what makes airplanes do what they do. So first I code the laws of physics, then I give it to my beta testers, and then a guy that flies seaplanes all day or helicopters all day or, auto gyros or whatever, they fly and they tell me, oh no, this is where it's weak, this is where it's strong. And then I go back and say, all right, what laws am I not following? What laws, have like constants I can tweak or adjust to hit the target we got to hit while still following the laws that I've researched. And float planes and helicopters are two of those things, right? With airplanes, we've got the laws of physics just dialed in. But helicopters, what's going on with the vortices moving around that rotor disc and the rotor moving into the, each rotor blade moving into the wake of the blade before it, helicopters turn into a really complicated aerodynamic situation where there's correction factors. There just has to be correction factors. There's no correction factors almost in, say, a glider in X-plane. It's pretty much just straight up math, and it hits within a few percent. But helicopters need correction factors because of the crazy vortices around the rotor disc and rotor blades.
Cool. Okay. So earlier you mentioned as well about the aircraft coming to X-Plane 12 have all been specifically chosen for reasons, like various reasons and stuff. Do you want to dive into what those aircraft are and why you picked them and why they're kind of important to the X-Plane 12 family?
Yeah, sure. I mean, let's take the Airbus A330, for example. That's actually one I initially did not pick. Some other people in the company were like, oh, Austin, you got to stop doing Boeings all the time. You've got to give some, European users a like, do an Airbus. It's like, okay, whatever, fine, go ahead. That was actually one that I didn't choose. I gave in to other people in the company. And so they built an A330. Okay. And you've probably seen the A330 video on the X-Plane channel. If not, go look at it after this interview. So they did it. And I get notes every week from the artists on what they're doing. And these notes start coming in with all the reversionary modes and emergency modes and checklists, and systems displays in the A330. And I'm like, damn, this guy's doing this to a lot of detail. Then the images start coming and showing all the lighting, where like the windshield reflects light differently than the body, and the painted aluminum reflects light differently than the landing gear. I'm thinking, God, this guy's going to some serious detail. Then the screenshots start coming in where you can see the ribs under the aluminum skin reflecting the light as the skin bends slightly around the aluminum frames. I'm like, holy cow. And so then they email me the aircraft. And so I've got this A330 with just all the systems detail, all the artistic detail, all the rendering and the lighting and the painting and the aluminum and the rubber, the tires and this, the fan spinning and the turbine and the reversers, opening up. I'm like, God, this thing is detailed. And this airplane, it's a 3-spool engine. There's a little spool in the back, and that drives the second one, that drives the third one. This is more efficient, but it makes the whole process slower to operate because each spool, there's a delay before it spools up the next one. And it's not until that final big front fan is spooled up that you get any thrust. And I advance the throttle in the A330, and the thing kind of goes, of all these different noises coming up slowly all at once. And the thing just slowly starts to accelerate. And at that point, it's like, oh my God, this thing weighs 400,000 pounds. It may just be a twin engine airplane, but I'm flying a 400,000 pound airplane. And those giant engines just slowly spool up. And those slats, flaps are slowly coming down. I'm slowly building up 120 knots, 140 knots to get flying. And I've got the Airbus flight control system in there perfectly. Okay, I've got the whole, how much you're allowed to bank, how many G's you're allowed to pull. The wings automatically level if you get too fast or too slow. All this Airbus flight control system is in there, and I coded it to the math, right? I coded the numbers, and then I'm flying that A330, and I go hard over on the stick, and the plane just kind of goes. It's like 500,000 pounds, kind of gradually going to 45 degrees. Then I just let go of the stick. And it kind of goes, and its 500,000 pound gradually comes to 30 degrees and holds, which is what the real flight control system does. And then I get off the gas, and the thing basically doesn't slow down. It's got so much weight, but no drag, that it's basically just like an ice. It's like 500,000 pounds on ice skates, right? It's just coasting down the rink and not slowing down. I'm like, holy crap. And so it doesn't want to speed up. It doesn't want to slow down. It doesn't want to suddenly bank fast. It's very, very slow to maneuver. And you can really tell that you are flying an airplane that is designed to be efficient, to cover the distance between New York and Heathrow with a minimum consumption of fuel. It is big. It is low drag. It doesn't do anything quickly except coast across the sky at 7/10 of the speed of sound at a minimum fuel burn. And you have got to plan your descents. You got to plan your approaches because there is no sudden changing your mind. And so every moment I fly this airplane, I'm just so aware of all the detail we put in the model, but also the design purpose of the airplane, which is not to hot dog and stun around, but it's to move between, different far separated nations with a minimum of fuel consumption. And that's a lot of weight, a lot of cargo, a lot of fuel, a lot of passengers, and just a minimum of drag and a minimum of maneuverability. So you absolutely have to plan in advance to fly that plane. That is an airplane where you can tell how much it weighs as you're flying it in X-plane. And so the moment I first started flying that airplane, I realized an incredible design parameter of the A330, but also the incredible flight modeling in X-plane that let me feel all that weight and let me feel that low drag. Let me feel the way all the systems work. And so the 330 was just an incredible airplane to choose for X-plane 12. And it's really something special to fly. It's not that easy to fly because you have to plan in advance. But if you plan everything in advance, you got your descent, your approach, if everything's planned out in advance, you barely have to touch the stick for the entire flight because it keeps itself level. All you do is just kind of suggest a little left or right, suggest a little faster or slower with throttle adjustments. And it'll be as safe and easy to fly as you please. But if you don't plan ahead and you expect it to suddenly change because you suddenly change your mind, no, you've got a little wake-up call because that ain't going to happen. So right. A330 has just been an incredible plane to fly in X-plane 12. And then you've got the absolute opposite end of the spectrum. I put my Lancer Evolution in there. So my Lancer is the exact opposite of everything I just said. That thing weighs 2,000 pounds and has 1,000 horsepower, right? This airplane weighs empty less than a Toyota Camry, but it has 1,000 horsepower available from that engine. It has no weight, and the prop, oh my, it's like a 7-foot across prop. So it's this gigantic engine, this gigantic prop, this huge, I mean, the wing is so thick. It's like this thick wing that puts out all of this lift. So you have this obscene amount of power, obscene amount of lift, gigantic prop, and no flight control system. I mean, in that evolution, whatever you do with the stick, it's wired with there's cables going directly to the flight controls. However fast you can do this on the stick, that's how fast the flight controls are going to move. And the autopilot in that airplane can barely even hold it level. I mean, the autopilot is like not up to the job. It's like barely hold altitude and course, and that's it. So you have to fly it yourself. And so the evolution is like the exact opposite of the Airbus. You can just pop it into a 90-degree bank, pull 2 Gs on final approach, pop out the nose. When the flaps and landing gear come down, the drag becomes so insanely high that it just falls down like this. And then just raise the nose right at the end of that huge high lift wing, just stops your descent and pops you onto the runway quick as you please at 75 knots. So the evolution is the exact opposite. Take all of the efficiency, all the flight controls, all the safety features out, and it's nothing but a carbon fiber bubble with a 1,000 horsepower engine, and it does whatever you want it to do. So that's been a really fun airplane to fly in the sim, just like it is in reality. It's you need to fly it, but how it rewards you is you can make it do absolutely anything you want within the laws of physics, but with the 75 knot approach speed and a 300 knot cruise speed, you can go between any airports quickly. And with that 300 knot cruise speed lets you go between airports, and the 75 knot approach speed lets you land anywhere. And so you've got access to these tiny, dinky little airports with that 75 knot approach speed. Every private little strip you've got access to. But with a Mach 0.5 cruise, which is what it's got, you can connect these tiny little airports 1,000 miles apart quickly. And that's exactly what the real airplane does and what makes it so valuable. And it's fun to do that in the sim. You can go between 2 tiny little grass strips 1,000 miles apart in this airplane. I don't know of any other airplane in the world that will do that.
I was watching the SR22 video as well the other day, watching that kind of come alive and seeing how the oxygen system works and the de-icing and stuff. So all of that stuff is really connected to this idea that X-Plane 12 is quite a living, breathing world with kind of the environment having an impact on aircraft as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, does it ever? Yeah. So in the Lancer Evolution, for example, this is the real airplane. This will show up in the sim too as well, even if you can't really feel it as much. The airplane is so light and the prop is so big that when you fly an approach in a Lancer Evolution in turbulence, the air surging fore and aft, okay? Because, in the turbulence would be air pushing and then the air going the other way. It changes the thrust on the prop, the air racing into the prop or then retreating from it in the turbulence, that you actually feel the airplane speeding up and slowing down as you come forwards and backwards in your belt as the prop pushes and pulls the airplane in respect to turbulence. With an A330, you never feel that, right? It's this big, heavy thing with no drag. It'll coast in almost unaffected by the air, but in the high frequency range. But with the Evolution, even high frequency turbulence, you just feel it not only in the roll and the pitch, but also in longitudinal surging as air moves into and out of the prop. So the Cirrus is another great one. The Cirrus SR22 was the first airplane I ever owned. We have the Cirrus dialed in just fine. It flies exactly like the real one. And that's a nice little plane. It's only about half the speed of the Evolution, but it's very, very nice to fly. You don't have to plan ahead too much in that airplane because it'll only build up 170 knots or so. So you don't have that much speed to lose. And with that fixed landing gear, it's got enough drag. It'll come down, reasonably steeply. And the prop, when you pull the throttle back, you can't firewall the prop like you could, say, in a Columbia 400 because the prop is kind of hooked up to the throttle automatically. So there's a little bit of planning ahead in the Cirrus, but not too much. It's very, very responsive, very nice to fly, and it's certainly your modern standard for a general aviation single engine prop.
Awesome. Sounds really good. So the other question I wanted to ask you was, you've talked about the experimental aircraft in the past that you've either helped develop or you've had in the sim using X-Plane to help develop the flight model. Have you had much of that with X-Plane 12? Or are we going to see any of those types of aircraft coming for that airplane as well?
Yeah. So that hits on something fascinating. So whenever you design an airplane, they always try to give it plenty of wing and propeller and power so it doesn't require very much runway. What if an airplane required no runway? And then they say, oh, well, they try and make it, efficient and low drag to use less fuel. Well, what if it used no fuel? An electric vertical takeoff and landing airplane uses no runway and no fuel. It solves the problem as well as a Tesla solves a problem with cars. With cars, we are asking, well, how little fuel can we use? Well, Tesla says, guess how much fuel we're going to use? Zero. We're going to use no fuel. And so Tesla's just completely changed the game with cars. And electric vertical takeoff and landing airplane are going to completely change the game with aviation. And there's a company in Burlington, Vermont called Beta. I'm an early member of Beta, and ALIA is the electric vertical takeoff landing airplane that we are building there. And we put that in X-Plane, and we use the ALIA flight simulation to let the test pilots practice their real flights in the sim before they go fly the real airplane. And so, and it's also used to test variations in design and power and weight and flight operations and stuff like that. So ALIA, and it's beta.team is the website. Anybody after this interview, go check out beta.team. You will see this carbon fiber electric vertical takeoff and landing airplane. And X-Plane is always step one. X-Plane is step two. X-Plane is step two in the process. The first step in the process is computational fluid dynamics. Make sure this thing is really going to do exactly what you want by the numbers. And then step two is something like X-Plane, and X-Plane specifically, and some other flight sims that back me up with second opinions, where you actually fly the thing in real time. And then, of course, step three is to fly the real airplane.
Wow, cool. Can't wait to see what X-Plane 12 has. So just away from flight dynamics, we talked very briefly on the world, and in a later video, we're going to talk about clouds and weather and that stuff. But I just wanted a bit more of an overview of how do you see the world connecting a little bit more like together than we've seen in previous X-Plane releases.
Right. So I'm not sure exactly how to answer that for X-Plane 12. I have a long-term vision. Maybe we're already starting to look a little farther into the future. I have a long-term vision where everybody is online together, massively multiplayer, real weather, online environment, persistent. You're always flying with everyone else in the real world just by default. And you would basically want to be in a professional training sim in an isolated environment is like the exception to the rule. We're starting to test that basically right now in two different ways. One is massive multiplayer on mobile. Okay, the mobile version of the sim has this massive multiplayer where you can see other airplanes in the air. And another system that we have for desktop, not mobile, is the real weather system. And so we've just got this incredible real weather system where, I'm down the weather, and we now change the weather over space and time. You don't get either of those things in X-Plane 11. With X-Plane 11, the weather just flicks from one to the other as new reports come in. And once a report comes in, it kind of like assigns that everywhere. It's not that great compared to what we have now in X-Plane 12. X-Plane 12 has the weather gradually changing over time with interpolations between data points every 60 seconds. So every 60 seconds, there's a new data point, and the clouds interpolate in between them. And they change both with real weather in real weather mode and pseudo-randomly with non-real weather mode over space. So you can see large areas of clouds or large areas that are clear. And so as you want to go from one airport to another, you really start to ask the question, am I going to be able to do this VFR? And then with these three-dimensional clouds that we've got, for the first time ever in X-Plane 12, I've been flying along in an airplane looking at clouds that kind of go down to kind of an uncertain distance below me and towering up to 30,000 feet above me. And I'm like, oh, crap, what am I going to do now? Because it's just not clear where exactly I can make it without getting into this cloud and possibly losing control of the airplane. So the three-dimensional clouds really build an aviation world where you start to be aware of the limits of your airplane and the limits of your skill when you start to approach them. And the real weather brings all that to life. And then the massive multiplayer and mobile lets you fly with other users. Well, I don't think I have to work too hard to paint the future that we're going to move to as we take the massive multiplayer from mobile and make it on desktop as well, and the real weather system in desktop, and move it to mobile as well.
Wow. So a really connected world is to come in the future.
Absolutely. And the only question is, over what time period we phase it in. And what that's going to be determined by is how quickly mobile hardware is willing to accept our real weather system from desktop, and how quickly our server guys can move over massive multiplayer from mobile to desktop. And so, sometimes in YouTube comments, I'll hear people that are flying the mobile version say, you don't do any mobile updates. Why do you spend all your time on desktop, right? And then you see the desktop comments. Why are you doing mobile? That's just a game. Well, they're both wrong. They're both wrong. They're both just spewing this dogmatic diatribe that isn't connected to reality. Here's the reality. The hardware is converging, the operating system is converging, and whenever we deploy something on one platform only, if it's better, it's only a matter of time before we converge that into the sim as well. And it was a few years ago, we took the X-Plane flight model and moved it into mobile. And so each product or each platform benefits the other platform, because mobile is a perfect way to start with this massive multiplayer. Desktop is a perfect way to do this real weather system that interacts with 3D clouds. And so each platform is perfect for testing a new technology when it's just right for that platform. But as the hardware and the software converges, which they are obviously doing, it's ultimately going to become a simulator that you immerse yourself in. And whether you're on a desktop or an iPad or an iPhone, doesn't make any difference. And ultimately, it won't. And ultimately, I think what's clearly going to happen is you're going to have your VR goggles that you put on. And whether those VR goggles are hooked up to some big desktop machine, or whether they're just connected to your phone and you're in a VR goggles while you ride the subway, it's not going to make any difference. You are in the aviation world. Doesn't matter how you got there.
Excellent. And what are your views then on kind of cloud gaming that's coming into its own light? Do you think X-Plane will kind of be on the cloud side of things, or is this the technology will be powerful enough to host X-Plane actually on the mobile device itself in this vision?
Oh, okay, so this might be slightly farther than I can mentally go. I hear about people running the app on a computer server and then using the internet to send in the video from the app. That to me seems insane, because I cannot imagine how you can get the latency low enough, right? When I move this joystick, I don't want more than a 60th of a second between joystick deflection and aircraft response. Why on earth would you want to send your data with all the latency and hiccups and things that go wrong over the net? I can't imagine sending your joystick to a computer that's running somewhere else and then returning the video to you. People have experimented with it, but I admit I haven't experimented with it myself yet, because I'm just like poo-pooing it right from the outside. I'm like, that's not going to work. I'm not going to add all that latency to the system. And so the future that I see is the app runs on your desktop computer, or it runs on your VR goggles, or it runs on your mobile phone or pad, which someday we all know is inevitably going to broadcast to your glasses or your VR goggles, your contact lenses, or whatever you're wearing. But the app, I think, is going to run on your local hardware to minimize latency, but it will connect to the massive multiplayer online world, so you can see everyone else flying and talk to air traffic controllers, which will be people, not machines. And this may seem a little bit weird, right? I've gone to all this trouble to write 2 generations now of air traffic controllers for X-Plane. But nobody, including myself, is ever happy with these automated air traffic controllers. They're just not as good as a person in my well, they're not, period. And so we're actually going to go backwards a little bit by moving away from automated air traffic control. I want to have humans able to be air traffic controllers in X-Plane, in this massive multiplayer online world that we're working towards in steps. Because that's just where you have the same experience as talking to a real air traffic controller. You got to talk to a person. So what I see right now with X-Plane 12 is this really building just an incredible framework, a framework where the flight model is dialed in. The atmospheric effects and weather and rain and water and waves and interaction with the air are all just dialed in. And as we dial that in for X-Plane 12, the question we ask moving forwards past 12.0 is, what do we do with it? We've got an incredible system. What do we do with it? And that's going to move towards a massive multiplayer online real weather world that you're implying here.
Excellent. Well, I think we're going to wrap things up there, because the next video is going to really focus about the sky, weather, clouds, and all of the more technical aspects of this living, breathing world that you've been mentioning. So I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me now about X-Plane 12. I think everything you've mentioned is very, very exciting. The new flight dynamics, the potential for a connected world. And it's also great to hear a little bit about your background and what you do. in your spare time, even though it's still all to do with X-Plane itself.
Yep. My pleasure.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Austin, and we will speak to you again soon. Bye.
Sounds great.